Well, hello. I am Bertron Hamill, and I welcome you to my home. A rather humble abode, if I might say. So, hope you are doing well this fine evening. I thought I might read a book that I have recently released. It's named The Reckoning of Olote, Ocnarin Book One. I'll just read the blurb here a little bit, just kind of give you the feel for what kind of book we're reading about. So it reads, after the Etheruvar creates Olote, Korar, the Dark Lord, moves to corrupt Etheruvar's glory to his own will. Korar's chief action to manipulate Etheruvar's creation to corruption is to tempt, deceive, and make war with Etheruvar's children, the Elaith. And the Elaith fall away from Etheruvar in a condemning curse. As the Elaith war with Korar, Etheruvar gives his promise of the gift of redemption for the reconciliation of the Elaith. Here reads the events and battles of the Elaith and the war of Korar and the Elaith. For though the Elaith thrive over the years in developing civilizations, how well or how ill they weather the trials and attacks of Korar only result in times of decay and struggles of a kind to love one another and hold in honor in face of a sinful nature that breeds corruption, bloodshed, and tyranny. So this is, of course, an epic fantasy. A Christian epic fantasy, to be specific as you could probably tell by the blurb of the story of Olote in whole. It does indeed tell the gospel in a fantasy setting. However, I will remind you that this is an ambiguous tale, and while some Christian symbols are straightforward, others are more subtle. So you can very well simply read and enjoy this as simply an epic fantasy, if you so prefer. So I thought I might read a little bit of our tale. And I think I might actually start with reading the actual title of the book itself. Now, I do not have no intention to control how my words are pronounced, how they're said. That is entirely up to the reader, to their own discretion, how they choose to pronounce it. I just say that based on my own experience in terms in the past when I read someone's book, and sometimes certain words, just the way they had intended for it to be pronounced, didn't quite to say that struck me in the right way, I guess you might say. Just didn't feel right to me. And I won't go into whose books I'm talking about or what words am I talking about. It's their works, that's whatever they want to do, but I tend to want to give a little more freedom in that, of course. I mean, it's like you want to do whatever you want anyway, but anyway, just have that little disclaimer out there. So, The Reckoning of Olote, the proper title, let me get to the page. Yeah, of course, introduction. All right. Nunvaknwe tel Aloysius. That is to say, The Reckoning of Olote. And we're going to, well, I'll go ahead and read our little interlude poem. One Lord for it, and one to contest it. A star of darkness and a star of light. A star of deadness and the gift of life. Death has a part and death has a role, but the gift in once shall pay the whole. That's just really, everything that does follow does have bearing to that theme. So I'm going to take us to chapter 6, and of course, what better way to get there than by the table of contents. So I should be able to look back, shouldn't I? All right, Chapter 6, page 177. Appeasement of Nundar. Now, this story concerns an island of Nundar, a kingdom of Nundar. And it had been ruled by a very wicked king in his time who had set. He was very controlling, very dominant. And he was so set in his ways that those who opposed his beliefs were put under oppression to very specific persecution, and he has set the entire community that aligned with him against the other community. So it wasn't just his oppression, it was the oppression of one community on another. And you get to read about that in the earlier chapters, actually as early as chapter 2, if you ever pick up the pages to read it. But that king's name was Zarled. So basically he removed all morals. And the very culture was perverted. And so you kind of borrowing from Tolkien's terms a little bit with Numenor, the faithful versus the unfaithful. The unfaithful themselves would persecute the faithful, and they lived very immoral lifestyle. So Zarled was at the very heart of that. He had perverted the culture of Nundar. The result of that was that the faithful had to live in more obscured, lower profiles in life, and for those who remained, many fled refugees. So this takes place sometime later. Chapter 6, entitled Appeasement of Nundar. In time, King Arntham of the Kingdom of Nundar managed to reduce Nundar activity to a minimum in associations betwixt the kingdoms. So you have a little bit of politics between the foreign nations' relations, so to speak. Nevertheless, the damage had been done, as the Nundar people had associated closely in interaction with some of the Nundar whose company and influence was not at all prudent. For some Nundar had grown accustomed to certain rumors and doubts. For the Nundar considered the names of Ivar and Korar as fables, and they referenced the battles as rumors. For who hath seen these great lords, said they, and others would presume. Who knows to what extent the Urgas have taken with such ruses? Fortunately, the influence of these didn't overcome the Nundar very far. But the influence of ambition and theft, politics, and manipulation of laws resulted in greater consequences. Corruption had been sown as a seed by Corbic that would persevere for generations to come. Even those of spiritual office had lost sight as they were succumbed to personal gain. Were it not for Tyrion's counseling with the people and looking to the word and Ivar's gift, they would have forgotten. And so was a hard lesson learned, and that is that a people in general perspective will always be quick to forget. Moreover, the relationship betwixt the kingdoms and peoples of Hodarian and Tovarian were estranged, yet the pact of the great council remained. Over a length of time, this narrative tells of a time as it had passed some generations later. The actions of a young Nundar, excuse my tongue twist there. The actions of a young Nundar take place. Over a length of time, this narrative tells of a time as it had passed some generations later. The actions of a young Nundar take place in the fates of the kingdoms as the words of Ivar's messengers begin to take shape. Bildare of Nundar was born to Cabell and Erlis of the faithful amidst the people in Nartel, and for the most part they remained hidden. Cabell's family lived quiet and peacefully for a time, as he was a merchant who dealt trade betwixt the city and outer ports. Their home was established towards the outer rims of town, for they desired distance from the palace, and they loved not the shadow of the mountain, as they counted it to be cursed. For rumors of a prophecy had left the mouths of some of the guards and nobles in the days of Zarled, and many ears took hearing of it. But open speech was soon dead to the open sight, for Zarled had decreed them to be words of treason and penalty of death, a decree that was carried as law for several generations after. As the lad grew to the age of a toddler, he had taken a liking to an elderly ally of the outer fields in the reaches of Renak, who was a good friend of his parents. His name was Pidel. Often as Bildare visited Pidel, he would hear stories from the sea merchants and the explorers, all of which he would listen to with fascination. Stories of the great creatures of the sea, stories of many adventures in their explorations, and stories of dangerous ventures of South Hadarian and dealings with the Urgos. Additionally, those stories often told of strange creatures of hideous form. He spoke as the Elaith did, and more fearsome were the strange creatures which had seemed to brood from the forest of Nodrin and haunted all who came near. Bildare rarely played with the other children of Nundar, for Nundar-eyed children of selfless grace were hard to find. He managed to deal with certain selfish traits at times, such as bad attitudes and poor sportsmanship, and he rarely gave in to revile in return. Insults with time he learned to be of little consequence. But when they would steal from him, take leverage of him, and even attack him, he would give them no grounds, as he would take his stand. In standing firm, it was a hard lesson to not return in making offense. He was, for the most part, graceful and very kind-hearted, and Bildare's parents taught him well in the manners of growing wisdom and of truths lived, looked for, and unlooked for. These included the truths of Ivar's word from what had been passed down through the generations from the beginning. As a child's life is not easy in the land of Nundar, Bildare's was one to have very misfortunate bearing, for a few ally of trade in Nartel took leverage in setting up Cabell for prison. Under pressure of busy-bodied Elaine and prowling children, Erlis was obligated to leave the city of the fields of Renak. There Pidel gave relief and shelter, and aided in looking after the young lad. So Erlis raised Bildare with the aid of Pidel, and the lad developed character with sound wisdom, hardened hands for making a living, and a sense for the sea. Yet the lad was one to be hot-headed and hard-tempered whenever his spirit broke into such temperament. For however rare it would show, due to his tender heart and great patience, he could almost bust when his frustration got the better of him. Coming on the age of 14 years of Bildare, Cabell's position among the faithful had been discovered, thus resulting in his death. Pidel's home had been pillaged, as both he and Erlis were slain, yet Bildare escaped as he hid in a pile of Pidel's old sea gear. The lad broke away in time before the place was set aflame, so he fled south over many ridges and over a portion of the southern desert to Elaith. Knowledge passed from Pidel was of great aid to Bildare in skill of the sea, so that he passed on to work on ships with the seafarers of Elaith. So Bildare enlisted on a variety of frigates, schooners, and even galleons, and in the early days of his career he was not yet of size to effectively subject his hands in work of heavy duty. Thus he often worked in cabins and assisted captains with their physical needs and organization of documents. These included logs and parchments. His first assignment was under the command of Captain Jervis, aboard a schooner performing tasks in sea harvest, whether it be for food or other material means. An ally far from perfection was Jervis, but he was well-mannered as far as Nundar were concerned. He entreated the lad with well favor due to the boy's tendency to show fair countenance of respect and diligence. Yet neither did he indulge him, as he would playfully taunt him as a merit of his own way of giving respect. Under him, Bildare learned much of navigating the sea, the arts of sea voyaging, and the responsibilities and management of a commander. and in their travels Gervais was impressed with the lad's broad knowledge of the sea and his knowledge of the ally who harnessed and exploited. As he grew, his career progressed in performing hard labor and head count among the crew of various ships whose commanders were much less mannered. They were often harsh and short on patience. Crew were often treated well, that is, as long as they met standards, but every captain kept wit in how far in punishment they were willing to go. For every ally with seafaring sense knew that the crew was the essence of a ship's life. Bildar bode well. Sometimes he earned favor, and others showed only disdain, as he was considered too fair of mind. However, Bildar was very observant of their strengths and flaws, and exploiting the lessons of his experiences, he often weighed every thought and action with the quote-unquote elder lessons of his parents. It was in such times that Bildar had achieved his Elaithhood, as he was in his 20th year. He was a Maasai, a master crew next in rank to the Firthi, the first mate of a galleon called the Verthin, the Sky Voyager, and the Verthin was commanded by Captain Elmark. Elmark could be rough, but was never outright cruel when it came to his ally. Even though he did not win their love, he did win their loyalty. He commanded his ally with purpose, as he always would see that given tasks were done, and he was known to have never failed his purposed mission. In dealings with the Elaith of Orville, he was usually less than chivalrous, straight to the point, and always moving forward. Occasionally he could be outright rude. Amongst the ranks of the Verthin, there was little love for the Orville, especially the Nundar. For the Nundar stood witness in representation of what their people abhorred, the living message of Ivar. They often mocked them in conversations gossip whenever such train of thought came across, and as Nundara dealings with the Nundar were more frequent than times before, that was more often than they had liked. But Bildar could care less of their rambling. He gave the Nundar respect and would correct the crew at times when warranted in their rash manner. For matters such as this, Elmark did not wholly favor him, and would cross with him on occasion. Nevertheless, he always possessed some merit of respect and admiration for him. As Elmark did not win the love of the crew, but only their loyalty, Bildar won both. For while he supervised their dealings with professional diligence, he always kept their welfare and voice in concern. Bildar alone was willing to speak in behalf of the crew and be their voice, which is practically unheard of among the Nundar. Every once in a while, the Verthin would encounter challenges such as Nundar pirates, for such an association of the Elaith had turned renegade and built their trade of life amongst the Nundar, an archipelago of many islands of the great southern seas, far off on the western coast of Tavaria. Eventually, the Verthin made berth at the Bay of Eldam for resupply and repair. While given haven, a great part of the crew in lead of Bildar gave the established port aid in the further exploits and ventures. For as the establishments of Nundar had multiplied in presence of the given territory of Eldam, they were spreading and encountered resisting dangers of the neighboring inhabitants of the Urgots. Furthermore, they were often troubled by strange beasts of unknown origin. As the occupation reached further inland, such activity had infested as of late. As told on this venture, the Verthin's crew were led by Bildar in a head count of 20. They were joined with another 20 ally under the command of the Eldani commander by the name of Fireplace. Together they went to investigating the intensifying threat of the beasts by the way of the river as it led southeast. For whether they were native to Odan or in way of migration, none could as of yet give an answer. The ally often mumbled in their occupational thought, and occasionally they would outright grumble. When noticed, such commotion was seldom tolerated, but as time passed, it was not only the commanders who responded to the grumblings. For on occasion, beasts would prey upon their loudest at unawares. The vanishings were too abrupt for there to be any identity of the beast to report. As their path lengthened, they began to travel in groups as opposed to single file, so as to not expose themselves to be found vulnerable. In length, their travels took them on the eve of a forest, as all the given signs pointed to it. Beholding the forest was intimidating, for it conceived an enveloping darkness that seemed to persist in disregard to weather or time of day. The trees that took growth there were aged, twisted, and deformed, and they varied of a dark willows, deep oaks, marred cedars, and many others that were far less delightful. Such was the discovery of the Nundar forest. And I hope you enjoyed the story so far. If you this is the start of Bilder's story, and if you enjoyed it and wish to hear or read the rest of it, rather, then I would encourage you to consider purchasing Reckoning of Olote, as you may explore this world, not only learning the rest of the story of Bilder, but many others, some similar, some different. Many heroes, many villains, many heroic deeds, many foolish acts, many wicked decisions, and many ambitious in walk. And yet courage and valor and hope remain amidst it all. So, until next time, at the Fireplace with Bertron Hamill, reading The Reckoning of Olote.